Hello and welcome back. I'm really excited for this episode. I get excited for all of the episodes, but I was thinking and realizing that the month of May is Starfish Social Club's birthday. I started Starfish Social Club in the month of May. I started it to coincide with my birthday for really no reason other than I think it gave me a timeline to get things done. Starfish Social Club is 8 years old. A lot of the people who follow this podcast, YouTube, are already in the Starfish Social Club. And so you guys already know probably a lot of the history and how long that we've been around. You might not realize it's been 8 years. That seems like a long time to me. But I also know a lot of people find Starfish Social Club through the podcast or YouTube. So you may have no idea what it is or where we come from. So I want to start by giving the history of Starfish Social Club, how we got to where we are now. I say we, I do that all the time about kind of everything, and I don't really know why. I guess it's just the inclusivity in me. I don't know. Starfish Social Club. So I want to give a background on how this all got started, and where we are, where I am now, and what's going on with Starfish. And then I want to share the things I've learned along the way in the last 8 years. I started with the intention of having 8 things I've learned in the last 8 years. But when I made my list, I came up with 9. And I feel like they're all equally valuable. And so then I just realized technically our birthday has passed. And so we're in our 9th year. I am in my 9th year. And so 9 makes just as much sense as 8 at this point. Let's start with the history of Starfish Social Club. In 2016, I was working for the school system, public school system, which is my background. And I had requested to go to a conference that was people presenting about a strategy methodology that I was really familiar with. It's something that I had used in the past in previous positions, and it was something that I really wanted to bring into my position that I was in now in this new school district. And so I was given permission to go to this workshop, this conference. And as I'm listening to the people who are presenting, they work for the organization, but they basically run social skills groups. And I'm listening to them present. They're selling their curriculum, their program. And I just thought, I want to do that. Not work for them, but run social groups. I want to do that. I think that would be amazing. At the time, I was a behavior specialist for a school district, which I've been several times in different capacities and in different cities and places. And the difficult thing about that is some of my time was working with kids, but that wasn't what I was supposed to be doing. I was supposed to be supporting teachers, providing training and staff development, attending meetings, giving recommendations, writing reports. And so every time I'm in a position like this, I end up spending the majority of it working with kids. Number one, because that's my favorite thing to do. And number two, I am stubborn and I am impatient. And sometimes I get to where I feel like the best way for me to help kids is to work with them directly, especially if I'm trying to guide or support or mentor somebody who maybe just has a different mindset or mentality. So I'm at this workshop and I'm listening to these people talk about how they run social skills groups. And I just decided I'm going to do that. That's what I want to do. This was February, and they are based out of California. And every year in the summer, they host their own conference, and people who are using their resources and materials can apply to present at their conference about how they're using this company's materials. So February, sitting there at this conference, hearing all of this, and I decide, not only am I going to start a business teaching social skills, but I'm going to present at this conference this summer. And so I went home. This conference was in a different city. Went home, figured out what I needed to do to start a business, started getting the paperwork done, came up with the name. People often ask me where the name came from because we're not on the beach. The first thing is I wanted a name that had to do with social, but would not be confused for social services. And so I wanted the word social in it, but I needed some kind of qualifier. And I came up with club, social club. And to me, that was just perfect for what I was trying to convey, that we're a social club, that Starfish is a social club. And so then I needed a name for it. What's the name of this social club? And there's a story called the Starfish Story. So this is the version of the Starfish Story that I have, and it's author unknown. This used to hang up in our office, but it's been a while. A young girl was walking along a beach upon which thousands of starfish had been washed up during a terrible storm. When she came to each starfish, she would pick it up and throw it back into the ocean. People watched her with amusement. She'd been doing this for some time when a man approached her and said, "Little girl, why are you doing this? Look at this beach. You can't save all these starfish. You can't begin to make a difference." The girl seemed crushed, suddenly deflated. But after a few moments, she bent down, picked up another starfish, and hurled it as far as she could into the ocean. Then she looked up at the man, smiled, and replied, "Well, I made a difference to that one." So that's where I got starfish from, is from this story and just the concept of one life at a time. I really do believe that what students are learning and accomplishing at Starfish has the potential to change their life. I very much believe that. And so Starfish to me represents one student at a time, being able to impact the life of one student at a time. And so that's where the name Starfish Social Club came from. So by the time I got everything, website, Facebook group page, by the time I got everything done, it was the beginning of May. I have ADHD and I have very little sense of time. Those of you guys who know me through Starfish are probably very aware of this. I'm a very last minute person. Time just doesn't really, I don't really operate in the constraints of time so much. And so to me, starting Starfish Social Club at the beginning of May and expecting to have kids enrolled in summer camp for June did not seem like an issue. It was a huge issue because apparently that's not how things really work. So the first summer, 2016, I had 4 students in summer camp, and 2 of them were kids of friends of mine that I basically begged to put them in my summer camp. So 4 kids in summer camp. And then after that, I turned it into a year-round program. Up until 2020, I was using the resources and materials from this organization that I went to the training with back in 2016 because I really loved their stuff. But I started to feel like it's really geared toward, it's completely geared toward what other people think about you. And while that's really important, it's, it's a lot of what we talk about at Starfish. If that's all you're focused on, that's where we create anxiety. When you're too focused on what other people think of you, that's where we get social anxiety. And that's not at all what I'm trying to create. And so I just realized that I was kind of falling out of love with this group's resources. And then COVID happened, and my in-person business, we went on spring break. I also had a school at the time. I was running a school through Starfish Social Club. We went on spring break in 2020. When we went on spring break, I had about 75 students enrolled in Starfish Social Club in our location in San Antonio, Texas. Went on spring break and didn't come back. Over spring break, that's when everything happened. And we were not able to reopen due to all the restrictions. So in April and May, I started teaching our classes via Zoom, mainly because parents started requesting it. In my mind, this was not even a reasonable option, but parents started asking me to. And I realized that my Starfish students were not texting their friends, FaceTiming with their friends, because they don't always have the same social connections. And so I realized that with my students not being able to go to school and not being able to come to Starfish, they were completely isolated. So I started doing Zoom in April of 2020 and just making it up as I went. I couldn't use any of the resources because we're on Zoom. I'm not sitting at a table with kids. And so everything I owned was all of a sudden pretty worthless. So I just started making it up every week. I'm really good at making things up. I have a great imagination and great problem solving skills. So I just started making it up each week what we were going to do. And by the time summer camp came around, we were able to reopen and move forward. And for a while, we did hybrid classes. So students who wanted to and were able to come in person came in person, and students who wanted to stay home got to participate via Zoom, but we were all together. I had computers set up and TVs set up so everybody could see each other, whether they were in San Antonio or on Zoom, we could all see each other. The logistics of that were pretty challenging. So I think I did that for 2 years. And then I moved back to just in person because logistically it was challenging. What came out of the pandemic for Starfish Social Club was that I ended up writing my own curriculum. I took the time that, this is my source of income. This is what I do. So I had a lot of free time when the pandemic happened, and I ended up writing the curriculum that we now use and that I now license other people to teach as well. It is a 32-week curriculum. Every lesson is about an hour, so 32 hours worth of curriculum. And so when we came back in 2020, that's when I started teaching this curriculum and being able to assess how the students responded to it. If they asked questions that I hadn't addressed, I could add them to what we talked about. It was really great. And so now we've done that. I just finished my 4th year of running groups through this curriculum that I've created. And I have multiple groups every year. So this, I've been able to teach this curriculum at least a dozen times based on all the groups that I've run through it. And so it just gets better and better every time because I'm able to get feedback from the students. I'm able to integrate new questions, new discussions, new conversations. In the summer of 2023, I just really, part of the challenge of being what they call a solopreneur, which means you run a business by yourself, is that it is very consuming in kind of every sense of the word. It's time consuming, it's energy consuming, it's financially consuming. And especially going through something like COVID, where my sole source of income was gone. It's so stressful. And our enrollment never recovered we've never again had 75 students like we did before. A lot of the students just never came back. So the last few years have just been a little bit of an overload for me, I guess, with all that kind of happened with COVID and everything. We also had grown so big that I had several staff members. I had multiple teachers teaching groups. And that was honestly kind of rough for me to manage that many people. And I also had students complaining that other people were teaching. And so now I'm back to being the teacher. It just seems to be, it makes me happiest. It seems to work best for the kids. So we've gone through lots of transformations and iterations of what Starfish Social Club is. We no longer have the school. I didn't reopen that after lockdown. So that's where we've come to in 8 years. Oh, I forgot my latest thing. So last summer, I really just felt this need, like I did not want to keep living in San Antonio or really even Texas in general. I had lived there since I was 2, and I just really wanted to be able to go somewhere else. I also really wanted to be able to do some traveling, which I've only done a couple times in the whole time I've had Starfish, because it's one of the things with being a solopreneur again is usually if you take time off, you're losing income, right? If I'm not teaching classes, then I'm losing income. And so I just really wanted to be able to move, and I wanted to be able to travel. And so I took a huge risk, knowing I was taking a huge risk. And I closed the in-person portion of the business. I closed the San Antonio location. When our lease ended, I did not renew it. I sold all of our furniture. I turned off the phone and the internet, and I transitioned Starfish Social Club to an online business. Since August, all of our groups and classes and one-on-one sessions have run through Zoom. The really cool thing about that is that Starfish Social Club now serves kids in multiple states across the US and different places in Texas as well. And I've worked with a student one-on-one in the UK, since obviously our time schedules didn't line up for her to be in our groups. I've worked with a family in Australia. It's really amazing how the transition has allowed my program to be accessible to more people in more places. That's been really amazing. That's where Starfish has come in the last 8 years. As I'm recording this, it is May. We're getting ready for summer camp. I'll be back in San Antonio in June so we can have our in-person summer camp. I've definitely really missed physically being with the students. I've had a really good 6 months of kind of resetting my life, and I did move out of state, and I have been able to travel. So I've had a really good reset of my life. I actually don't know what I'm doing next. I don't know what next school year will look like. Again, I'm a last minute person. So I'm not sure, but I do know that in June, I'll be back in San Antonio for summer camp, which I may even be more excited about that than some of the kids are, because that's just really exciting to me to be able to see the kids again. That's the background. That's the history. That's the story of Starfish Social Club. So like I said, that led me to think about 8 things that I've learned in the last 8 years when it comes to teaching and supporting and coaching and working with autistic and ADHD kids. And as I mentioned, I have 9. They are not in any order except the order that they popped into my brain. That's the only order that I have to them. I also know that different people will take different things from each one of them. So it makes no sense for me to try to prioritize them, because everybody who's listening or watching will have their own prioritization. Some of them will not resonate with you at all, and some of them you may really resonate with. So I'm just going to share them in the order that they came into my mind as things that I wanted to share. And of course, I love telling stories, if you don't know that already. So every one of them has a story attached to it, because I love talking about my students and sharing stories. So the first one on my list, I was listening to a podcast recently. I don't even remember what it was about. It was not anything related to social or autism or anything related to that. It was just some podcast I listened to. I don't even remember which podcast it was, but I remember that the guest being interviewed was telling a story about being on an airplane, and there was a family next to him or in front of him that had young kids, and the kids started arguing, and one of them hit the other one, and the one that got hit started screaming and wailing. And so the guy says the dad started trying to console the kiddo and talk about what was happening and talk about how the kiddo was feeling. And the guy being interviewed said that while he appreciated the dad trying to work through the situation with his kiddo instead of, punishing or being angry or anything like that, he said what never happened is that the dad never expressed to this child, hey, there are a bunch of other people on this plane, and they are all getting pretty annoyed that you are being so loud on this plane. And I have to say, that sounds exactly like something I would say. I think building that social awareness is the core of everything, helping our kiddos understand the world around them. We are all selfish, self-centered creatures. That's how human beings are designed. It's a survival characteristic. We talked about this in our groups the week before I'm recording this. We talked about this, about how we're all selfish and self-centered. And one of the kids said, yeah, it's because our duty as human beings is to survive and procreate. So our goal is to survive. Exactly. But what we try to do as we get older and more mature is become more aware of other people and their needs. I'm in a Facebook group for female entrepreneurs with ADHD. And a woman posted just a couple days ago that she really hates talking on the phone, which is a pretty common characteristic. And sometimes when she conducts business via email, someone will say, can I just call you? And she said, how do I politely tell somebody no? And my response was, I also much prefer email for different reasons. Number one, my memory is really poor. And so when I have things in writing, I can go back and reference them. Even recently, somebody brought up something that happened like a year ago, and I had zero recollection of it. But by going through the email chain, I could see exactly what had happened. Without that, I would have had zero recollection of what we were even talking about. So it's one of the reasons I prefer email, is because then everything's in writing. Another reason is that, and I'll teach you a little secret about how I operate. I will check emails at random times. I may check email at 1 a.m. when I'm up thinking about something. But I don't respond to emails at 1 a.m. So if I respond to an email during non-Starfish business hours, I will schedule it to send during Starfish business hours, which are afternoon, evening. So I also that's another thing I appreciate about email is I can respond to an email at 1 a.m. It won't send at 1 a.m, but I'm not going to call somebody at 1 a.m. So the other thing I appreciate about email is the flexibility of it. Third, I like being able to take the time to put thought into how I answer something. I'm a very black and white communicator, and I often feel the need to go back and kind of soften up my emails a little bit because I know that a lot of people I communicate with are not black and white communicators. And I know that I can sometimes be perceived as like short, sometimes even rude. And that's never my intention, but I'm just succinct and to the point. So even an email, I'll type out my response to whatever, but then I'll go back and I'll make sure that I'm, being more engaging and more soft about it. But my response to her was, I totally get it. I totally get the desire to only communicate by email. However, that's your need, and your customer is expressing their need. And the world does not revolve around our needs. So we need to be able to balance our needs with other people's needs. It's got to be a balance. It's going to be difficult for someone to run a business only communicating by email if they have customers that want to communicate by phone. And you're always going to have that. You're going to have people with all different kinds of communication preferences. And even at Starfish last week, I had a new family, and I've been traveling. And so I'm not even available on Zoom until today because I've been traveling, and they're trying to get questions answered and getting frustrated that email's the only option right now. And so I just sent them a note. I'm like, hey, they'd already signed up for summer camp. They're, but I can feel that they are feeling anxious because they just want to talk to somebody, and that option wasn't available. So I just reached out and said, hey, I've got, 20 minutes right now. Let's hop on a Zoom. And we did. And now everybody feels much more comfortable. So it's just that understanding that we have to be able to balance our needs with the needs of other people, which brings me back to the airplane story, as I call it in my notes, the airplane story. I really feel like helping kids understand how what they do affects the people around them is significant. It doesn't mean that they have to change what they're doing. One of my big things is everybody gets to make that choice. I will never tell a kiddo to stop doing something or to change what they're doing. They completely are in control of that choice. But I will point out to them how what they're doing is affecting everybody around them. And then most of the time they will choose to make a different choice. So that's number one on my list. Is I totally agree with his person who I don't remember who he is on a podcast that I don't even remember what it was about. I think the podcast actually was about research has shown that social emotional learning programs are actually causing harm to kids because they are they're putting so much emphasis on emotions and feelings and things like trauma that it's kind of like when you hurt your leg and you go on Google to see what's going on with your leg, and then you come away thinking that you're going to die. It's the same thing from a mental health perspective, that the more we talk to kids about mental health, the more we are planting these ideas in them that there's something wrong with them. And so now that I'm remembering, that's what the podcast was about, is how social emotional learning, which is a national initiative, it's in almost every school, is actually the research is starting to show that it's doing more harm than good, because it's all about emotions and traumas and processing negativity. And one of the examples was, if a kid comes in and says, they're having a great day, nobody really pays attention to that. But if a kid comes in and says they had a horrible morning at home, people start paying attention to that. And so the negative aspects of our emotionality get a lot of attention, whereas the positive aspects don't. Okay, so that's my long soapbox about that. Point being, the importance of teaching our kids how they affect the world around them. Not to the point where it's starting to cause them anxiety, like in the curriculum I used to use, but just helping them understand, if you are screaming and yelling on an airplane, there are potentially a couple hundred people that you are negatively affecting by screaming and yelling on an airplane. And just making our kids aware of that, just helping them be aware of that situation, that this is what's happening. Number two, this was something that really gave me a lot to think about. This was last summer in summer camp. One of the activities, we alternate different days in summer camp. Some days we do a drawing activity, some days it's a building activity. That way different students can showcase different things, and not everybody expresses themselves in the same way. Sometimes they get a choice as to which one they want to do. This one was a drawing activity, and it was to draw a place. I think it was draw a place that you have happy memories of, or something like that. And afterward, a lot of times I'll have the students share with the group what they've created, whether it's drawing, whether it's building, sometimes we do writing activities, to share it with the group. Number one, it builds kind of like novice public speaking skills, but also our groups are so supportive that it's a really safe environment to do something like that. It also helps the students who are in the audience, quote unquote, learn how to ask each other questions or make comments, basically to be engaged in what someone else is sharing. So he was one student in particular, he was an elementary student, and he was sharing his drawing. And I remember it only took up a portion of the page. And another student, who's a high school student, asked him, why is there so much white space on the page? And when I heard that question, my brain interpreted it as this student saying something negative about the other student's drawing. I interpreted it as a criticism. Why is there so much white space on the page? And so I said something like, let's remember that we all have different skills and talents and abilities, and let's be careful about, making negative comments about somebody else's drawing. And the student who had made the comment immediately said, oh, I didn't mean anything negative by it. I was just wondering if it represented something, if it meant something. And I realized as soon as he said it, I've known this kid for several years. I have never heard him say anything critical or negative to anybody, even when he's frustrated or upset. I've never heard him say anything that would be, derogatory toward another person. And so I immediately apologized, because he was right. I misinterpreted the intentionality behind what he was saying. So I apologized to him for that, because that was me inserting myself into that situation. Because what happened next is the kiddo who drew the picture had a really great explanation for why there was so much white space on the page. And I don't remember what it was, but it just really made me realize how I had a problem with something that one of the kids said that nobody else had a problem with, especially the kid who he said it to. That was my problem. That was my interpretation, my perception, and I was wrong. And that was just such an interesting moment for me, realizing that as much as I try to be more of a facilitator with the students and let them interact and engage with each other with my support. But one of my goals is really for them to be able to give each other feedback and engage with each other. And I'm just there to kind of support and facilitate. I interjected myself into that situation and I was wrong. So I love that moment because it taught me so much. It taught me that sometimes the things that bother us, nobody else cares about. And it's because we are interpreting it differently than anybody else. So I really try to think about that now when I see interactions with kids, and sometimes somebody will say or do something and I'll want to interject, and then I'll just remember I may be wrong. I may be misperceiving this. And sure enough, it's either the kids are able to handle it amongst themselves, or the other person doesn't perceive anything negative about what's being said or done, and everything's totally fine. I think for me, it comes from my instinctual need to protect my students. And I think that's what I was doing. I thought somebody had said something to him. And this was a kiddo who, if somebody did say something critical to him, he either wouldn't really recognize it or he wouldn't know how to respond to it. And so I think that was my protective instincts, knowing that if something like that were said to him, he wouldn't be able to really, I don't want to say defend himself, but he wouldn't be able to counter that. But that's not what was happening. That was just me overanalyzing the situation. So number 2 is to just, for us, the adults, to be aware of our own perceptions and biases and interpretations, and to recognize that sometimes our interpretation of something is very different than other people's. And even I use this sometimes, I think it depends on what kind of mood I'm in. And this probably, I think everybody will be able to relate to this. Sometimes I'll read an email and I'm like, did that person just say that? Like, what? And it will kind of, I'll feel a little bit upset, maybe a little bit hurt, maybe a little bit annoyed. And so I walk away and I'll come back to it later and I'll read it again. And it does not have any kind of tone at all. It's like I interpret the tone or the intention completely differently from 1 hour to the next. So I've learned that about myself, that if I see something or read something, I have to be careful with this on Facebook too, because sometimes I'll read just personal Facebook. I'll read a post in a group I'm in or something, and I'll be like, what did you just say? How, what, so I have to be careful about stuff like that too, that sometimes just giving myself an hour to come back to something and I interpret it very differently. So that's number 2, is just for us to be mindful about our own perceptions and interpretations, and to recognize that we may be the only one who interpreted that thing that way. We may be the only one who thinks that this is an issue and nobody else does. It's also come up sometimes with the students, somebody will be doing something, sometimes when we were in person, we would have up to 15 kids at a time. And sometimes one kiddo would be saying or doing something, and I would feel like, oh gosh, I bet that's going to start to bother everybody. And so I would say something about it. And then one of the other kids would be like, oh, I don't care. Be like, oh yeah, it doesn't bother me. They'd be like, okay, again, lesson, Steph. Just because something bothers you doesn't mean anybody else cares. So I really, even more so than I already do, try to take myself out of these situations, because I think sometimes that certain things will bother other kids, or that they'll find it rude or annoying, and they don't care. And so I really try to take myself out of these situations as much as possible and just be there to support the kids if they need me. Most of the time they don't need me. Okay, number 3, again, in no particular order. Oh my gosh, we over assume what our kids understand when it comes to the social world. We absolutely over assume. The one thing that always comes to my mind when I think about this is when my students laugh at something that's going on, but because I know them so well, I know that sometimes some of my students actually have no clue what's going on, but they're laughing because other people are laughing. I think that's my primary example of this. We over assume what our kids understand about social. And even, I'll tell you guys, if you don't know this, on the website, starfishsocialclub.org, you can see all 32 lessons in my curriculum. And module 1, the first 8 lessons, you can actually get the first lesson of module 1 for free. So if you go to the website under the resources tab, it's some, I don't have my website pulled up in front of me, but it's somewhere on there. And it'll have, module 1. And then if you scroll down to the bottom, you can just go through the first lesson of module 1 for free. So you can see kind of how I teach, what I'm teaching, what it looks like. And I know that when parents go through that lesson, I wonder how often they think it's too basic. But I know, again, as I mentioned, I've been teaching this curriculum for 4 years. I've taught it at least a dozen times. I've taught it to kids from 7 to 24, all across the intellectual spectrum. I have never had a kiddo tell me that it's too easy, it's too basic, I already know this. And I even, if you don't know this about Starfish, once students join, they can stay as long as they want to. I've got students who've been in Starfish for 5 and 6 years at this point. We do the same lessons every year in a cycle. So the students who are here in 2020 and are still here, they're repeating the same lessons. I still have never had a student say, I already know this, or this is boring, or this is basic, even though it's the same lesson they've had for 4 years now. I feel like I cannot overemphasize this enough. I wrote the lessons in such a way because I know we over assume what our students understand about social. And so the way I wrote the lessons breaks things down into very bite-sized, manageable information and concepts. Which brings me to my next one, repetition. Number 4 on my list is repetition. I have a script for each one of my lessons because I don't want to leave anything out. So even though I've taught them so much, I don't want to leave anything out of them. So I read my own script every time I teach the lesson. And I repeat myself so much. I repeat things we've already learned in the past. I repeat things I said 5 minutes ago, but it's because I know, number one, we don't all have the ability to pay attention all the time. Nobody in the world has the ability to pay attention all the time. This may be the first time a particular student is hearing what I'm saying. But I also know sometimes we hear things and we're not in a place for it to be relevant for us. Sometimes the things that I'm teaching kids doesn't apply to their life today, but a week from now, all of a sudden it does. So when they heard it a week ago, they didn't really pay attention and didn't really retain it because it didn't really apply. But now it does. And now when I say it, oh, that makes so much sense. It's even, I went through a non-traditional teacher certification program. I have my bachelor's degree in psychology, and then I decided to become a teacher. So I went through a master's program and did my alternative teaching certification. And so I wasn't in the classroom. And I remember it all just seems so irrelevant because I'm not in the classroom. I'm not teaching kids. I'm learning all this theory. I'm learning all this random stuff that I can't apply to anything. And so I remember very, very little of what I learned in college because I couldn't apply it to anything. And I think sometimes our students feel the same way, that it depends on where they are in life and what's happening in their life. So I repeat things constantly within the context of a lesson, across multiple lessons. And I even often find that when I'm repeating something from a previous lesson, we don't always remember it. I'll sometimes kind of ask the kids, like, hey, let me know, we talked about these 3 things. Who remembers one of them? And sometimes I get nothing. This is why I repeat things so often. Also, some of the things I teach are contrary to things that kids have learned before. One of the things I repeat probably more than anything else is it's always okay to feel the way you feel. I repeat that sentence probably more than anything else. It's part of a couple of our lessons, but I also say it anytime somebody is upset, frustrated, annoyed, embarrassed, etc. So I say that phrase all the time. And I get to the point where I ask it as a question instead of making it a statement. Is it okay to feel the way you feel? And of course, the kids who've been with me for more than a couple months know the answer is yes. But when kids first start, they say no, especially if we're talking about anger, frustration, anxiety, they say no. So I repeat this so much that yes just becomes the default answer. They don't even think about it anymore. They just say yes. And then they're like, oh yeah, it is. It is okay to feel the way that we feel. The same with is it okay to not pay attention? I say that every time I notice somebody isn't paying attention, or every time I ask somebody a question and they don't know what we're talking about. Is it okay to not pay attention? And because I say that so often, the kids know the answer is yes. We are not all capable of paying attention all the time. It is okay to not pay attention. So those 2, we over assume what our kids understand about the social world, and just the concept of repetition. If you have ever gone through the first lesson in my program and you feel like it's basic, I really encourage you to give it another try, or to go through it with your kiddo if they haven't been in the program before. Because again, I've taught this to even the same kids for years, and I've never had somebody say that. And again, the kids keep coming back. Kids are only in my program if they want to be. And so they keep coming back because they want to be. Okay. Oh, the next one. This one might make me a little bit emotional. It's always okay to feel the way you feel. The number of times this happens in 2 situations. The first situation is people just reaching out to me because they've discovered the podcast, or they've come across us on Facebook or Instagram, or somebody referred them to us, whatever. So the first situation is usually the first time somebody comes across Starfish Social Club. The second one is when I'm in my personal life and somebody asks me what I do and I explain to them what I do. The easiest way I say it is I help autistic and ADHD kids make friends. That's like my one-liner. The number of times I have people say to me, I wish I had something like that when I was a kid. It happened even a week ago. I wish I had something like that when I was a kid. It was an email from somebody. The number of times I have heard that. I think my personal opinion is that our kiddos' social abilities are more important than most other things they spend time on growing up. Despite the fact that I come from the public school system, I'm not a big fan of a lot of things our kids are required to learn about after about 5th grade. Don't think everybody should go to college. I think if kids don't want to go to college, there's plenty of other paths they can pursue. I think having kids in tutoring is basically forcing them to spend more time doing something that they already don't like and they already know they're not good at. But we're forcing them to spend more time doing it. I think that's a weird system. I spent a year as an assistant principal on a pre-K campus. So all the kids there were pre-K. And in pre-K, 4-year-olds, the big outcomes at pre-K are knowing all your letters and all your numbers and rhyming words. And if kids were not on track to know all their letters and all their numbers and their rhyming words by the time they were done with pre-K, that was a big problem. So the kids who were not passing their assessments throughout the year during center time, which is like playtime, they had tutoring as 4-year-olds. And which one of these is going to lead to the best life outcomes for a child, for a 4-year-old? Learning how to play and get along with other kids, how to problem solve with other kids, or letters and numbers at 4. So obviously this is a personal soapbox for me, but I think sometimes it breaks my heart a little bit when parents tell me that they're taking their kids out of social skills because they need tutoring, or that the schedule doesn't work for them because they have, these other things that they have to do that are related to things that I don't feel like will improve their life. Obviously, this is a personal bias that I have. But when I have adults tell me, I wish I had something like that when I was a kid, I've never heard an adult say that about tutoring. I've never had an adult say, I wish I had extra math help when I was a kid. Even adults now who struggle with math or who struggle with reading, there are so many ways to get by with that in the world now. I even used to be a tutor. One of my favorite things to teach when I was a classroom teacher was teaching kids how to read. I was really good at teaching kids how to read. And I became a tutor for a GED prep program. But what was happening is that students were enrolling in the GED prep program, wanting to take their GED, but they were illiterate. And the GED is actually pretty difficult. GED is, I think it's a general equivalency diploma, maybe. It's basically, instead of a high school diploma, it's a test that you can take. And if you pass it, you get the equivalent to a high school diploma, and you can enroll in 2-year colleges, technical schools, not 4-year universities, but stepping stones to 4-year universities if you choose to. So kids who've dropped out of high school, kids who are too old to go back to high school, kids who maybe are failing or getting held back. This is a non-traditional path that is a great option for a lot of them. Teenagers who have babies and miss a lot of school. It's just a really great non-traditional option. But what was happening, the GED test is difficult. And so you cannot take it if you can't read. So people were coming to this GED prep program and were illiterate. And that's what I started doing. I started teaching them how to read. And I will never forget, I had one man, he was in his 50s or 60s. He was definitely older. And he was the head custodian at an elementary school in San Antonio. And he said he was just passed through school, grade to grade to grade, but he never learned how to read. And so I asked him about how he functioned at work, and he said he learned what letters make, that he was responsible for ordering supplies. So, the cleaning products, everything that they needed, he was responsible for ordering them. And he learned the letter sequences that spelled each word. So he technically couldn't read the word. If you, use those letters to make a different word, he would have no idea what that word was. But he learned the letter sequences for the different things that he needed to order. So when he was on the website, he could see, and of course, on ordering anything on a website has pictures. So he had learned how to function in his job while being illiterate. I mean, when I started working with him, we were at beginning. I mean, we were at the beginning of learning how to read, but this man had a functional career. He was a head custodian. So my point being, I think we underestimate the essentialness of our kids getting support with social skills. And even the episode that was released prior to this, we're talking about dating, and kids who struggle with friendships more than likely will struggle with romantic relationships because there's a lot of overlap between the two. If you're struggling to connect and get along with other people, why would that be any different when you're an adult and you're trying to date? So that's my next one. The number of times adults have said to me, I wish I had that when I was a kid. And how it just reinforces my own belief that this is really powerful stuff. Oh, okay. My next two are actually things that former Starfish Social Club staff members have shared with me. I really like to ask people what they've learned by working at Starfish because it's such a different kind of place. So two of my favorite employees gave me really profound answers to this question that have really stuck with me. One of them was somebody that I hired. She had no experience working with autistic or ADHD kids, teens, adults. She had just graduated with her degree in psychology, but I just really loved her attitude and her personality. And in my opinion, I can teach anybody how to do what I do as long as you have the right mindset going into it. And so she's a great example of that. When I asked her what was the kind of the biggest thing she learned out of working at Starfish, she said she learned that helping is not always helpful. And I thought, oh, I love that so much. And so I asked her to kind of tell me, what that meant to her. And she said, my philosophy is that we help kids as little as possible. What we do instead is ask questions, provide support, give suggestions, but we give direct help as little as possible. And I'll give one of my favorite examples is when we have in person. I've always made sure that our spaces, we have our own restroom just because we have kids as young as 7. Also, if kids need to use the restroom during class, I don't want to, wonder, where they are and what they're doing. So we've had our own restroom for a while when we had our in-person space. And when I would have kids come in, I always meet with everybody before they start in the program. And so I would have kids come in for their first meeting. Sometimes it would be somebody's sibling, but anytime somebody would say, where is the restroom? I would say, see if you can find it. And almost every time at the same time I'm saying that, a parent is saying, oh, it's, wherever, around the corner, over there, I'll help you find it, whatever. And I just say, no, let me see if you can find it. I bet you can figure it out. The same, a couple of times we would have, we don't have food or drink at Starfish except water. So a couple of times something might spill, somebody's water bottle didn't have a lid on or whatever. And I would just say something like, what do you think you can do about that? How do you think you can clean it up? And sometimes they would say, oh, I need paper towels. And so I would say, where do you think you could find paper towels? So I don't ever say, oh, they're in the bathroom. I don't ever say, let me go get them for you. I really work hard on not doing things for kids and not giving them answers to things. And sometimes their answers and their solutions are much better than what I was thinking. And so even when if there's a conflict between kids, I don't solve that. That's not my conflict. I will support them. I will give them suggestions and recommendations. We'll talk through it, but I'm not going to tell them how to solve that problem. I'm going to let them try what they think might work. And then if it works, that was awesome. If it doesn't, let's talk about it. let's talk about what we might be able to try instead. Or why do you think that didn't work? And so that was Sarah's feedback, is helping is not always helping. And she said she had a really hard time with that when she started, because it's a very different mentality. Those of us, those of you guys that are parents, those of us that are educators, we are born helpers. That's why we have kids. That's why we are educators, because we want to help people. And so she came into it with the mentality of wanting to help people, which of course is what we do. But just like she said, helping is not always helpful. And so what I tend to do and teach my team to do is we take a step back and we help by helping our students figure things out. Ramiro, who was with me for several years, very important person in my life. He was a right-hand man at Starfish for a while. He was my customer service person. He was teaching classes. So he was with me for several years. He knows Starfish better than anyone, except for me. If anything were to ever happen to me when he was at Starfish, he was my emergency contact for a while, because I thought if anything happens to me, he's in charge of Starfish. And we got to the point where if a kiddo asked us a question, we would have the same response. When I asked him this question, his background, he also did not come from education. His background was in recreational therapy, and he had worked a couple years at summer camps. And what he expressed was that his role in the summer camps that he worked in, his role, these were camps where the campers had a one-on-one person with them. And his role was to make sure this camper had a great time. That was it. Whatever they wanted to do, they did. Make sure they have a great time at camp. That is not my goal at Starfish Social Club. One of the things that's really important to me is that we are a learning environment. We are not a recreational hangout. We are a learning environment, which is another reason sometimes I get parents to ask if their kiddo can just come for like 2 weeks, or if they can just do game time. And my answer is no. We're not a hangout. We're a learning environment. And so Ramiro said that one of the biggest things he learned by working at Starfish is that we can have such a big impact on the kids by teaching them all the things that we teach them, by teaching them how to be more aware of other people, by giving them feedback for some of the things that are being said or done, by teaching the students to give each other feedback. He said it was really amazing to him, the difference between the students he was used to at the camps where they were just allowed to do whatever they wanted to, and the students at Starfish, where we are creating this learning environment for them, and how the outcomes are so different. Okay, a couple more. This one actually goes back to the conversation about adults telling me they wish they had Starfish Social Club when they were a kid. And that is a concept that the things that I teach, actually, I'm going to kind of bundle these next two together. The things that I teach have no age parameters around them. Starfish Social Club starts at age 7 because it's a very cognitive, language-based program. Kids below age 7, it's a bit too much for them. Their brains are not really ready for it yet, starting at age 7. Plus, attention spans factor into it as well. So that's why I start at age 7. For students to enter, I cap that at 21. The only reason I do that is because the only time I've had enough adults to have a group was before COVID. We had actually a really solid adult group, but most of them did not come back after COVID. And so since then, I've never had enough interest to have another solid adult group. And so I cap the entrance age at 21, but once students are in the program, they can stay. So I think the oldest student I have right now is 24. And I know I have several others that have graduated from high school, because once they're in, they can stay as long as they want to. It's never too early to start working on this stuff. The exception to that would be for kids who aren't interested, like they don't want to. I've only had that happen in 8 years. I can only think of 2 times where that's happened. One of them, the kiddo straight up did not want to be there. He was 8 maybe, and just kind of, yeah, he made the groups really rough, and he didn't really care, didn't want to be there. And so he ended up, that did not work out. Another time I had a high school student who came to the first session and chose not to come back. And I think that kids coming to one session and not coming back, I think has only happened twice in 8 years. It's only happened twice. So really, I think the only time I would say it's too early for what I teach is because kids aren't ready. They're not open to it. It's also never too late. Usually when students are older than 21 and they want my support, we just work one-on-one. It's never too late. And even, gosh, sometimes I get overwhelmed by all the posts I see in the Facebook groups I'm in for women with ADHD, because the things that they're struggling with and asking for help with are so many of the things that I teach in the program. It doesn't change because they're 30 or 40 or 60. It doesn't change. And I even know a couple of years ago, I had a student in the program, and his grandfather had been diagnosed with autism. And the student's mom was telling me that it's all the same stuff. The student, who I think was 12 at the time, and the grandfather, it's the same stuff. And even when I do work with adults one-on-one, I had a session with somebody a couple months ago, and yeah, it's, I was telling her all the same stuff I teach the kids. I was interviewed on a podcast a couple weeks ago, and the person who was interviewing me has ADHD. And so she told me 3 things that she's struggling with, and she asked for my recommendations. It's all the same stuff I tell the kids. So it's never too soon to start working on all this stuff, and it's never too late to start working on all this stuff. The only window is when people are ready for it. Sometimes people are 40 and they're still not ready for it, and that's fine. The only window is when people are ready for it. It doesn't matter how old they are. And so that brings me to my next point, which is also my last point. I have no idea how long this is going on for. I knew it was going to be a long one. If you don't know this about Starfish Social Club, I no longer separate students by age or by ability. When we had so many students, we did. We had 3 different age groups. We had elementary, middle, high school, and adult. And we had different days of the week for different abilities, presentations, that kind of thing. So we would have, for each age group, I think we had 9 groups going on. For each age group, we would have a group for kiddos who their communication skills were not as developed. And then we would have a group for kiddos who were, kind of middle. And then we had a group for kiddos who were identified as gifted. For every age group, we had all these mixes. So when a new family would come in, I would assess, okay, how old is your kiddo? And then when I met them, I could tell, oh, this would be the perfect group for them. There's no such thing as that anymore. I think trying to remember, I know that changed when we came back from lockdown. I think what was happening is that so let's say you wanted to enroll and you had a 15-year-old who was in a gifted program. Their class, for example, met Wednesdays from 6 to 8. Well, if your kiddo wasn't available Wednesdays from 6 to 8, you were kind of out of luck. And I just kind of started to realize that. I think when we came back from lockdown and I started to try to recreate the groups, but we had lost so many kids in the process. And so I just was like, it is impossible for me to recreate these schedules and these groups because so much has changed. And so I moved to just, these are the times that we have spots open. Which time works best for your child? And that's how I enroll now. It doesn't matter how old your child is or what level they're functioning at, they come to the time that works best for them. And especially now that we're on Zoom, we've got students in 4 different time zones. So when we were still in person at Starfish, what tended to happen, well, pretty much exclusively what happened is the students who were younger came to the earlier classes because they were out of school, and the later classes were too late in the evening for them. And then the kids who were older came to the later classes because they weren't out of school yet for the earlier classes. So by default, the ages got separated when we were still in person, just by default. But then during summer camp and during game time, there's a complete mix. There's no separation of ages. And I've even done videos and things like that. Actually, I'll see if I can find on Facebook the video I made about this, and I'll pin it to the top of our Facebook page. Because what I realized when I made this transition, the kids don't care how old they are. They don't care how old the other kids are. And I've had kids that are, 7 years apart that form really great relationships because they have similar interests or they have similar maturity levels. And so combining the age groups, I think, has been really amazing, actually. I can have an 8-year-old with the maturity of some of my 14-year-olds. And I can have a 17-year-old with the maturity of some of my 10-year-olds. I also find that the older students tend to naturally become mentors to the younger students. I'm even specifically in one of our groups right now, I have a younger kiddo that just has made so much progress this year with his attention, his emotional regulation, his participation, such a huge difference from when he started in August. And a couple of the older kids have kind of taken him under their wing. We're all on Zoom. They actually, the one I'm thinking of in particular, they live in different states, but they've kind of taken him under their wing. And it's really cool to see because to his peers in school, I'm pretty sure that they struggle with the way that he behaves sometimes. But to the other students in the group, they have taken the role of supporting him and nurturing him. And the same for kids of different abilities. I think we as the adults give this way too much power and way too much thought. The kids don't care. I've only had this be an issue one time, and I honestly think it came from the parents and not the kid. I can think of so many situations where there have been friendships formed by students across intellectual levels. Some of my favorite examples, I two students who went to prom together on different ends of the intellectual spectrum, but they were both in Starfish for several years and they just really bonded. Two students who ended up at the same middle school, they were both already in Starfish, but at different elementaries, I think. And then they ended up at the same middle school, riding the same special needs bus. But again, one of them is in regular classes in this middle school, and one was in special ed classes. But now they know each other from Starfish, and now they're on the same bus. Oh my gosh, those two kids became like magnets, which never would have happened probably if they didn't ride the same bus. I've even in one of the groups right now, it's really interesting because there's a kiddo who is a little more cognitively challenged, and he and one of the students who I would assume the student's probably in gifted classes in school, they have formed this really cool connection just because they have some similar interests. So I see that happen a lot, a lot. Even when we were in person, there was consistently a group of 7 or 8 students that had all been in Starfish for several years, so they were all super familiar with each other. They were all high school and older, and they would all congregate together for game time. And they were all over the intellectual spectrum. I mean, all over, but they were like this tribe, and they were very inclusive. Anybody could join them. It didn't really matter. But they always hung out together, the 7 or 8 of them, even though they're all over the intellectual spectrum. And even there's a picture, one of my favorite pictures from Starfish. It used to be our cover photo on our Facebook page. When I look at that picture, it's the same thing. There's like 8 or 9 kids in that photo, including my dog, who is no longer here. But the same in that photo, the kids are all over the intellectual spectrum. And so I think this is actually a question I get asked fairly often by parents is, what age groups and are there going to be other kids, quote unquote, like him or like her? And my answer is yes and no. But also, you care a lot more about that than your kid does. And every student at Starfish has things to learn from other students. And every student at Starfish has things they can teach other students. Every student. It's really, I have to admit, I was a little bit wary about making that change at first, but I have absolutely not regretted it. And summer camp is still the same. At summer camp, it's whoever is signed up on that day, I'll see you then. And we just all hang out together. It's really amazing. I really love the inclusivity that happens in this program. It's really amazing. So I don't intentionally ever separate kids by age or ability. Parents, basically, when we have openings, parents choose the schedule that works best for them. Sometimes there's not a choice. Sometimes we only have openings in certain groups. The same with camp. Parents make the schedule that works for them, and that's who your kid's going to be with when they come that day. And I think it's been really amazing, and I really love it. I think it gives everybody different perspectives than their own. Yeah, I think it's really cool. Okay, on that note, again, I have no idea. I'm pretty sure this one was over an hour. Again, I have very little concept of time. Those are the 9 things that my brain thought of that I have learned in the last 8 years of running Starfish Social Club. Really excited that we're now in year 9. I'm excited that it's May and we have summer camp coming up in a couple weeks. As I'm recording this, we're on our last week of the last module of the school year. So we'll take a break for a couple weeks and get ready for summer. I'm excited to be back in San Antonio and see my students. So if you're new to Starfish social groups, obviously that's the main thing I talk about. That's the most popular thing. That's usually the reason people are even coming across me and Starfish in the first place, is because they're looking for groups. So that's the most popular option. Those run all school year long via Zoom. Summer camp, go ahead and check out the website and see, depending on when you're listening to this, we have summer camp in June this summer. I also have a pre-recorded version of Module 1 that you can purchase if the evening groups aren't an option. If you want to just do it on your own with your kiddo, you can purchase the pre-recorded version of Module 1. I have pre-recorded versions of more modules, but they require the kids to interact with other kids. And so I have not made those available for purchase, because if your kiddo doesn't have other kids to practice the skills with, they're not really going to get a lot of benefit out of it. So I may reconsider that in the future, but for now, it just seems like it's not the most beneficial for kids to teach them things without supporting them in actually practicing them. And then I also do one-on-one support. So one-on-one support is really ideal for kids who live outside of our North American time zones, or who are older than 21, or who just want something more specific. One-on-one support can really be anything. With some students, I've gone through the curriculum just one-on-one instead of in a group. With some students, we haven't done the curriculum much at all, and we've just worked on things that are specific to them and what's going on in their life. It can also be used for parent and family support. It can be used for me to consult with your kiddo's school or workplace. So those are all the different ways and options. And like I said, I don't know what we're doing when the next school year starts in August, because my brain right now is focused on June. And that's just kind of how I operate. So I'm not sure what will happen in August. But I do know that I'm incredibly grateful to be able to do what it is that I do. It started, as I mentioned, on a random whim 8 years ago. And I'm really grateful that I'm so impulsive, and was able to pull that off. I'm really grateful to be able to do what I do. And I'm really grateful for everybody who is part of Starfish Social Club, for everybody who listens to the podcast, for everybody who watches on YouTube, however you participate in Starfish Social Club. I'm really grateful for that, because it gives me the opportunity to do what I do. And it is the thing that makes me the happiest, is being able to help and support my students and help them change the trajectory of their social lives. So thank you guys for being here. I'm really glad that you're here. I'm really grateful for your support in whatever form that it comes. We will be on a break for a couple weeks before we head into summer. So I'll see you guys again in June.